This is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardinas, to use this as an educational material. Good day, everyone. My name is Indian Cadet Glenn Fujiniega, and we'll be talking about human trafficking. So, what is our top? The topics are: what is human trafficking? What are examples of human trafficking? What are the three elements of human trafficking? And what is the current state of human trafficking in the Philippines? So, we have 7 members, which consists of me, Glenn Fujiniega, Jericho Pacanya, Christian Paul Alvarez, Kervin James Cabigas, Ravik Dave Burden, John Charlon Ubal, and Ariel Caralde. So my topic is, what is human trafficking? So our objective is, first, to identify human trafficking. Second, what involves human trafficking, and third, what human trafficking do to lure their victims. So human trafficking. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Every year, millions of men, women, and children are trafficked worldwide, including the right here in the United States. It can happen in any community, and victims can be any age, race, gender, or nationality. Traffickers might use violence, manipulation, or false promises of well-paying jobs or romantic relationship to lure victims into trafficking situations. Language barriers, fear of the traffickers, and or fear of law enforcement frequently keeps victims from seeking help, making human trafficking a hidden crime. Traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to lure their victims and force them into labor or commercial sexual exploitation. They look for people who are sus- sus- susceptible or for a variety of reasons, including psychological or emotional vulnerability, economic hardship, lack of social safety net, natural disasters, or political instability. The trauma caused by the traffickers can be so great that many may not identify themselves as victims or ask for help, even in highly public settings. Many myths and misconceptions exist. Recognizing key indicators of human trafficking is the first step in identifying victims and can be help save a life. Not all indicators listed are present in every human trafficking situation, and the presence of absence of any of the indicators is not necessary proof of human trafficking. The safety of public as well as the victim is paramount. Do not attempt to confront a suspected traffickers directly or alert the victim to any suspicions. It is up to law enforcement to investigate suspected cases or human trafficking. So, so what human trafficking is and isn't. Human trafficking is the business of stealing freedom to profit. In some cases, traffickers trick, defraud, or physically force victims into providing commercial sex. In others, victims are lied to, assaulted, threatened, or manipulated into working under inhuman, illegal, or otherwise unacceptable conditions. It is a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry that denies freedom to 24.9 million people around the world. Although human trafficking is recognized as a growing international phenomenon, a uniform definition has yet to be internationally adopted. The United Nations (UN) divides the human trafficking into three categories: sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and the removal of organs, and defines human trafficking as the induction by force, fraud, or coercion of a person to engage in the sex trade, or the harboring, transportation, or obtaining of a persons for labor service or organ removal. Though the United States does not acknowledge the removal of organs in its definition, it does recognize sex and labor trafficking and describes human trafficking as the purposeful transportation of an individual for exploitation. So, how do people get entangled in trafficking? People trapped by traffickers are most trying to escape poverty or discrimination, improve their lives, and support their families. Vulnerable people are often forced to take an unimaginable risk to try and escape poverty or persecution, accepting precocious job offers and making hazardous migration decisions, often borrowing money from their traffickers in advance. When they arrive, they find that the work does not exist or conditions are completely different. They become trapped, reliant on their traffickers, and extremely vulnerable. Their documents are often taken away and they are forced to work until their debt is paid off. The trafficking scheme. Human traffickers often create transnational routes for transporting migrants who are driven by unfavorable living conditions to seek the services of a smuggler. Human trafficking usually starts in origin countries, namely Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and Sub-Saharan Africa, where recruiters seek migrants through various mediums such as the internet, employment agencies, the media, and the local contacts. Middlemen who recruit from within the origin country commonly share the cultural background of those migrating migrants, view the services of a smuggler as an opportunity to move from impoverished condition in their home countries to more stable, developed country.
Good day everyone, I am Jericho P. Pacanya and I am here to continue the report of Mr. Zuniga for today's topic. So let's proceed. Example of human trafficking. The example of human trafficking are sexual exploitation, forced labor, death bondage, domestic servitude, organ removal, forced begging, child soldiers, and lastly, forced marriage. First of all is sexual exploitation. So what is sexual exploitation? It is an actual or attempted abuse of a position of vulnerability, power, or trust for sexual purposes, including but not limited to profiting monetarily, socially, or politically from sexual exploitation of another. The example of this one is sexual voyeurism, such as watching a person undressing without his or her consent, followed by invasion of sexual privacy and taking pictures or video or recording another in a sexual act or in any other private activity without the consent of all involved in the activity, such as allowing the person to hide in a closet and observe the sexual activity, or disseminating sexual pictures without the photographed person's consent. So this is the most common nowadays. And because of this, there are many nodes out there that we can see on social media. Prostitution is also one of them, and sexual exploitation also includes engaging in sexual activity with another person while knowingly infected with HIV and STD without informing to the other person of that infection. And also administering alcohol or drugs such as date rape to another person without his or her knowledge. The second one is forced labor. Forced labor can be understood as the work that is performed involuntarily and under the menace of any penalty. It refers to a situation in which persons are coerced to work through the use of violence, intimidation, or by more subtle means such as manipulated debt, retention of identity papers, or threats of denunciation to immigration authorities. So, the most common jobs that forced labor exists, such as agriculture and fishing, domestic work, construction, mining, manufacturing, processing and packaging, prostitution and sexual exploitation, market trading, and illegal activities. So, these are the example of forced labor that most common exists in that jobs, and by doing that it is against their will to do that job, but they are forced to because of their workers or their boss. And forced labor is the most common element of modern slavery. It is the most extreme form of people exploitation. The third one is debt bondage. Debt bondage occurs when a person is forced to work to pay off a debt. They are tricked into working for a little or no pay with no control over their debt. Most or all of the money they earn goes to pay off their loan. The value of their work invariably becomes greater than the original sum of money that they borrowed. It is the most common, and the example of this one is bonded labor is most widespread in South Asian countries such as India and Pakistan. Often, entire families have to work to pay off the debt taken by one of its members. Sometimes, the debt can be passed down the generations, and children can be held in debt bondage because of a loan of their parents had taken decades ago. That's why, whatever generations, the family are still poor because of the debt of their parents or grandparents that resulted to the extreme poverty they have experienced. Organ removal. Trading for purposes of organ removal involves removal of an organ from a person's body for the purposes of a commercial transaction in human body parts, while relating to the actual person as the subject of the transaction. We can use this an example of some people in India and Pakistan that they are tricked to sell their organs such as kidney and etc. in an exchange of an amount of money or a gadgets because they are told that organs will grow again and human can live without one kidney. This is a modus operandi whereas they will pay you half of the price, but after the operation they will suddenly vanish. Forced begging. Persons who are exploited in beggings are not begging voluntarily. They have been coerced into it, for example, by threatening them with a violence or to death bondage. The victims do not get the money given to them. Some or all of it must be given to the abuser. The example of this one is we can see poor children in the street begging food or money, and some beggars are forced to do it because there are person behind them controlling them to do that kind of action, manipulating them and taking advantage of the person by threatening and etc. So that's why they are doing their begging against on their own will, and that is force them to do the begging. Child soldier can be defined as a manifestation of human trafficking where it involves the unlawful recruitment or use of children through force, fraud, or coercion as combatants for labor or for sexual exploitation by armed forces. A child soldier is not just someone who is involved in fighting. They can also be in those roles such as cooks, porters, messengers, human shields, spies, suicide bombers, or those used for sexual exploitation. It also includes children recruited and trained for military purposes. Child soldiers are boys and girls who are often abducted and used as combatants, forced to act as a human shields or conduct executions, deployed as suicide bombers. Forced marriage. It is a marriage in which one or more of the parties is married without their consent or against of their will. Forced marriage happens because of many reasons, and we can say that poverty is one of them because for some other poor families, the marriage of a daughter to a man who is better off is both a way of giving her access to a high standard of living. They can also offer and a way of securing a nest egg in return for a dowry. Forced marriage is not new to us because we can see it in our environment, whereas the person is forced to get married because of poverty or to pay debt to their parents to that person for any other reasons.
Good day, everyone. I'm Christian Paul Abares, and my topic is what are the three elements of human trafficking? First, I'm going to discuss about human trafficking. There are three elements of human trafficking. First is an act, and second is the means, and the last one is exploitative purpose. The human trafficking, it is a process. First, traffickers act. This includes recruiting victims, transporting them to the place where they will be exploited, hiding them from authorities, and receiving victims from other traffickers. So why don't the victims run away or say no? Because traffickers use different means. This includes threatening or forcing victims to do what they want, abducting or deceiving the victims, and abusing power. Sometimes traffickers promise small payments or benefits to get the victim to cooperate. And why of the traffickers is doing this? The purpose of trafficking is exploitation. Traffickers take advantage of victims for their own profit or benefits. This is human trafficking. But I will be focusing of an act or what is done, and I will show you some videos to give you an example for an act or the first element of human trafficking.
This man's neighbor tells him that he has a great job for him on a very safe construction site and that he'll be paid a lot of money. With more money, he can make his dreams come true. He agrees to take the job. A few days later, the neighbor's friend picks him up and they drive to the construction site. It's a very long way from his home. This man is put to work immediately without any training or protective equipment, without enough to eat or drink, and with very few breaks. After many months, he's only been paid a fraction of what he was promised. He knows he's been tricked, but he doesn't have enough money to get home. This man is a victim of human trafficking.
So, as you can see on the first video, the man was recruited by his neighbor and tricked into thinking he was going to work as safe construction. So that was the act of the traffickers. They tricked the man. And now let's move on to the second video.
One day, while looking for jobs online, this woman comes across an opportunity to work in a restaurant in a big city. Her application is successful, and her new employer arranges for her travel there. She is met at the airport and driven to a part of the city that looks nothing like she expected. The car pulls up to a building. The door is shut and locked behind her. She is made to perform sex acts against her will. She is trapped. This woman is a victim of human trafficking.
So, as you can see, the woman is a victim of human trafficking. She was transported by trafficker from the airport to the location of the job. And that's the act of the traffickers for the second video. And now, let's move on to the last video.
This 14-year-old boy on school break is approached on the street by a woman who looks trustworthy. She tells him that she needs workers at her factory, and she promises him lots of money. He brings her to meet his parents. They are so happy for him. He'll now be able to save money for school. The woman drives him to the next town. They pull up to an old building. There is someone waiting for him. As he is led inside, the nice lady drives off. The factory isn't anything like she described. There are lots of people working, including many children. He works all day, and after just a few hours of sleep, he starts again. He is sad. This isn't what he expected. He misses his family. After weeks, he still hasn't received any salary or been allowed to contact them. He is trapped. This boy is a victim of human trafficking.
So guys, as you can see, the boy was a victim of human trafficking. He was tricked by the woman who recruited him on the street, and she promises him a lot of money, and that's the way of or act for the woman to simply trick the boy. Human trafficking is a global problem and one of the world's most shameful crimes, affecting the lives of millions of people around the world and robbing them of their dignity. Traffickers deceive women, men and children from all corners of the world and force them into exploitative situation every day. While the best known form of human trafficking is for the purpose of sexual exploitation, hundreds of thousands of victims are trafficked for the purpose of forced labor, domestic servitude, child begging, or the removal of their organs. Traffickers target people who are marginalized or in difficult circumstances. Undocumented migrants and people who are in desperate need of employment are vulnerable, particularly to trafficking for forced labor. Victims may be forced or tricked into an exploitative situation which constitute trafficking after the traffickers use violence, deception, or blackmail. Criminal trafficking children targets victims from extremely poor households, dysfunctional families, or those who are abandoned and have no parent care.
Good day everyone, I am Engine Cadet Cabigas. For today we will tackle about the third element of human trafficking, which is the purpose of exploitation or why it is done. First is the purpose or purposes for which traffickers use the people they traffic may vary, but the ultimate goal of all traffickers is the same. They exploit other human beings for profit, which can be financial gain or material benefit. Traffickers exploit other of variety of purposes like sexual exploitation, forced labor, domestic servitude, and forced or coerced organ removal. First is sexual exploitation. A person trafficked for sexual exploitation is forced to provide sexual acts against their will for the financial benefit or material gain of the trafficker. Sexual exploitation is defined as an actual or attempt abuse of someone's position of vulnerability, such as a person depending on you for a survival, food rations, school books, transformation, or other services. Differential power or trust to obtain the favors, including but not only by offering money or other social, economic, or political advantages. It includes trafficking and prostitution. Next is forced labor. all work or service which is extracted from any person under the menace of any penalty for which the said person has not offered himself voluntarily. In the context of human trafficking, a person trafficked for forced labor is made to work for a little or no pay, or maybe paid in full wages, but then forced to return most of it in cash to trafficker. So first, forced labor might also involve using a person as a drug mule, forcing them to transport and deliver drugs. Sometimes across international borders, children are often exploited in this way. In fact, a number of Honduran boys were forced by traffickers to sell drugs on the streets of Vancouver. Forced laborers often work and live in the same location and work under substandard, unhealthy, and unsafe conditions with little or no protective gear. The UN 2012 Global Report on Human Trafficking estimates the presence of forced labor in the Americas. Forced labor is common in Americas, accounting for 44% of cases of detected victims. Sexual exploitation was involved in slightly more than a half of detected cases. Most victims detected in Americas are female. Children account for about 27% of detected trafficking victims in the region. Next is domestic servitude. Domestic servitude is a form of forced labor and is defined as slavery or bondage. A person trafficked as a domestic servant may be forced to clean the house, do the laundry, cook meals, maintain the lawns and gardens, and look after the children, elderly relatives, and pets. Most trafficked domestic servants are required to be available at all times and work every day for little or no pay, and they are often verbally, physically, and sexually abused by members of the household. The trafficked person may be no control over their travel or identity documents, such as their passports, which may be confiscated by the employer or trafficker. Next is forced or cursed organ removal. Kidneys, livers, and hearts in particular are in high demand around the world for people who need a replacement organ but can't find a legitimate organ donor. The organ removal is often conducted in clandestine clinics with little or no attention given to the trafficked person's post-operative care. The organ is then sold on international black market for large amount of money. If the trafficked person survives the surgery, they may receive a tiny portion of the money. So that's all. Thank you for listening.
So hi guys, this is Rohit Elberdi from Team of Suniga. So now we will be talking about human trafficking. So what is human trafficking? Human trafficking uses people to destroy other people by selling them to other, and other will pay for it to have enjoyment, like it is done by giving them time in 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 space in every room, like Sogo Hotel or any hotel that it will be made. There are many kinds of human trafficking. Uh, Last I said, example that very common in human trafficking is um, pornography, blackmail, and many more. So why it is done? Because of the people are suffering in poverty, so they join this kind of work, so they will have money to buy their needs. So in this kind of work, this is unlawful doings. So in preventing this, we will create more work to help them and give them hope to survive in this world. So let's help each other to prevent this human trafficking. So that's why the government are hiring more, like President Duterte. He make the build. So many people in suffering poverty having their new work, good, and not like human trafficking, easy money, but it is very dirty money. Unlike others, they have dirty hands but clean money. That's why we will choose good work, and education is the key. If you finish your studies, you will have a good work, good salary, and a clean money. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy and learn about my discussion. Bye.
Good day, everyone. My name is John Charlon Diubal, and I'm here to talk all about the current state of human trafficking in the Philippines. And by the way, I'm from Group 5. So let's move on to the topic. So let's talk all about what is human trafficking and the recruitment method of human trafficking and who are the victims of human trafficking in the Philippines. So first, human trafficking, or otherwise known as modern slavery, and involves the use of force, fraud, or concession to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act against the will of the person trafficked. So that's the human trafficking. So let's move on to the recruitment method. So the recruitment method of human trafficking are traffickers may use violence, manipulation, or false promises of well-paying jobs or romantic relationships to lure victims into being trafficked, or bribing immigration personnel, or producing fake travel documents, and using student and intern exchange programs are some of the main methods of moving victims. So traffickers use both air and sea routes to transport their victim across a border and evade detection. And they capitalize on the lack of immigration personnel at smaller airports in the Philippines to smuggle people into the cities of Bangkok, Hong Kong, and Kuala Lumpur. So these serve as a major hubs of destination countries. According to the UN, or Global Program Against Trafficking in Human Beings, top destinations include the USA, Japan, South Korea, Italy, and Jordan and Taiwan. So that's the recruitment method of human trafficking. And who are the victims of it? The victims of human trafficking are including men, women, and children of all ages, races, and nationalities, and also both domestically and internationally. So let's move on to the main topic, which is the what is the current state of the human trafficking in the Philippines. So what is the current state of human trafficking in the Philippines? Um, The current state is unfortunately is quite high because the expert estimate that the number of people in slavery in the Philippines totals over 780,000, and many believe that this large number stems from the Philippines or low GDP per capita, which the country ranks 118th out of 191 nations in these measures, and its high poverty rate of 21.6%. So according to the US Department of State, the Philippines are a major source of both sex and labor trafficking, with one of the largest migrant population in the world. And while male people, migrant workers are typically exploited in the fishing, shipping, construction, manufacturing, agriculture sectors, while the females are exploited in domestic and hospitality roles. Children of both genders are subject to the sex and labor trafficking, and many of whom have been sold by family members. So the great risk of human trafficking in the Philippines are children, because estimates determine that the 60,000 to 100,000 children are the victim of human trafficking, and these children either go to work in child sex rings or work abroad as a prosecutors. So in some cases, relatives use children for profit and force them to commit various sex acts in front of a webcam. So the children committing these acts are typically no older than 12 years old, and each show can rake in about $100. And so in total, there were over 45,000 reports of online child sexual exploitation in 2017. But now, in this situation underrated by the COVID-19 pandemic, traffickers in the Philippines have adapted to use the internet as means of recruitment and abuse. So the United States reports a 265% increase in unconfirmed report of online child sexual abuse in the Philippines during the pandemic, according to the 2021 Trafficking in Personal report. So traffickers sexually exploit children in live internet broadcast where their customers watch from abroad and wire payment internationally. So these traffickers are very often parents or close relatives who force their children into online sexual exploitation. So the pandemic did result in a decrease in report of sex trafficking in location near offshore gaming operation due to the mass departure of Chinese national that these areas cater to. However, experts believe that the pandemic will only further increase socio-economic disparity or forcing more people into poverty and increase the number of people vulnerable to trafficking. So that's all for my topic. So thank you and have a good day.
Day everyone, this is Engine Cadet Ariel Caralde. In addition to Cadet Obal's report, because there is a huge number of human trafficking and child prostitution in the Philippines, it was ranked as Tier 2 watch list in the 2009 Trafficking in Human Persons report of the United States State Department. According to the United States State Department, the main reason why the Philippines is placed in Tier 2 in 2009 is because of the inconsistency of the government in enforcing the law against the human trafficking. So, what is the law that the Philippine government enforced? To combat the rising number of human trafficking victims, the Philippine government passed the Republic Act 9208, or the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003. Republic Act 9208 is a penal law against human trafficking, sex tourism, sex slavery, and child prostitution. The government continues to rely heavily on non-government organizations, or the NGOs, and the international organizations to provide services to victims. The Department of Social Welfare and Development, or the DSWD, operated 42 temporary shelters for victims throughout the country. 13 of these shelters were supported by a non-profit charity organization. Numerous overseas countries have introduced legislation. Example is the Crimes, Child Sex, Tourism Amendment Act 1994, which enables them to prosecute their nationals for crimes against children overseas. Only a few child molesters who have committed offenses in the Philippines are charged and convicted back there in their own countries for their offenses. The Australian government set, set up the Australian Federal Police Transnational Sexual Exploitation Trafficking Team, which investigates child molesters in places such as Philippines. Some countries from which sex tourism originates, including Australia, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and the United States, have passed legislation which criminalizes sex tourism. In the United States, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 makes travel with intent to engage in any sexual act with a juvenile punishable by up to 10 years imprisonment. From 1997 to 2006, we have learned that the number of victims in the Philippines is rising. But in 2017 to 2020, the Philippines is ranked Tier 1 watch list, and this is because of the government's right implementation of the law. Countries overseas should also be credited for their help in combating those unlawful acts. As a citizen, we can also do something to reduce the number of human trafficking in the Philippines. To make government services more accessible to the public, the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, or the IACAT, through its Advocacy and Communications Committee, or the ADVOCOM, launched the 1343 Action Line Against Human Trafficking in March 15, 2011. It is a 24/7 hotline facility that responds to emergency or crisis calls from victims of human trafficking and their families. The 1343 Action Line likewise provides a venue for the public to be engaged in the fight against trafficking in persons. Reporting can be done online through email or via the official website www.1343actionline.ph, social media networks, mobile application, and by calling 1343 and the international hotlines. Citizens should also take part in these kind of matters. That's all, and thank you for listening. I hope you learned something in this video.